Rain moved across the prairie like a slow curtain, erasing the horizon one gray fold at a time. Morgan Hale leaned into the wind, hammer steady in his hand, sleeves soaked and heavy. He drove a final nail through splintered rail, listened to its dull thunk, then let the hammer dangle from raw knuckles. A smell of wet ash drifted from the direction of the burnt barn. Smell he had never shaken since that night 2 years back, when the house went up like a pine torch and his world folded in on itself. He meant to head for the cabin, maybe warm the last of yesterday's coffee. Instead, he noticed movement at the edge of the yard. A figure trudging the wagon ruts, shoulders bowed beneath a battered oilcloth. The rain muted color and sound, turned everything to watercolor, yet the stranger's outline held. A violin case, beaten and missing one latch, hung from a strap against her back. She paused near the broken gate, fingers tight on the strap, eyes sweeping the ruins as if counting ghosts. Morgan studied the distance between them. 10 paces and a lifetime. Instinct said close the door, let the storm move her along. Habit tugged him toward the cabin's quiet where fire couldn't find him. But habit was how men calcify. He set the hammer on the rail and walked forward. She lifted her chin when he stopped. Water traced her cheekbones, but her gaze stayed level, green-brown like mesquite bark. No words, only breath mixing with rain. He slipped one arm from his duster, swung the coat around, and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture felt strange, like lifting a weight he had forgotten. She gripped the collar as if it might vanish. Her lips parted, soundless, so he filled the silence. "Cabin's warm," he said, voice hoarse from days without use. "There's coffee." She stared a moment longer, measuring invitation, measuring man, and then she nodded once. They crossed the yard. Mud clung to her boots, soles thin enough he could see toe outlines beneath the leather. The violin case bumped her hip each stride. He opened the door, stepped aside. She entered, left a small pool of rain on the threshold. Inside, the hearth lay cold. He knelt, stacked splinters, struck a single match, watched flame claw upward. She stood near the window where soot still stained the frame, eyes on the fire as though it might leap. Her right hand flexed and he saw the scar, pale rope of flesh across the knuckles, old yet tender in rainlight. Coffee grounds rattled in the tin. He filled the pot, set it on the grate. Steam soon rose. While they waited, he cleared the lone table of ledger pages. He no longer filled and set 2 tin cups. She slid the violin case from her shoulder, placed it against the wall, fingers brushing the lid in a farewell touch. When coffee darkened, he poured. She wrapped cold hands around the cup, inhaled, let one sip linger. The quiet between them held no awkwardness, only the soft ticking of raindrops on tin roof and logs settling in the hearth. He tried for a name. Morgan Hale. The sound sat heavy. He took a breath. "You." She swallowed, voice faint but steady. "Clara." Nothing more. He nodded, as though Clara were enough daylight for the moment. Lightning rippled beyond the window, illuminating what the room still carried. Blackened beams patched with fresh pine, a bed frame singe at one corner, Mary's cracked china cup turned lip down on a shelf. Clara's gaze drifted across each relic, registering without lingering. She did not pity the ruin. She simply accepted it. He pushed the second cup toward her. "Stay till the storm passes." She met his eyes, worry flickering. Obligation. Cost? He shook his head once. "No charge." She exhaled a breath that might have been relief. Dusk thickened early, dragged by clouds. Morgan lit a lantern, its glow caught dust motes spiraling like tiny comets. Rain on the roof grew gentler, then almost playful. Clara shed the coat, draped it over a chair. Underneath she wore a linen blouse, one sleeve patched with mismatched cloth, and dark trousers narrow at the calf. Simple, traveling clothes. No weapon. He sliced 2 pieces of cornbread, placed them on a plate. She ate slowly, as if memorizing each crumb. When finished, she surprised him, stood, collected their cups, rinsed them at the wash basin, set them upside down to dry. No question, no permission asked. A rhythm he thought dead fluttered. Company in a house that had forgotten the word. Night settled full. He pointed toward the bunk along the back wall. "You can take the bed." She shook her head, touched the braided rug near the hearth. Floor was fine. He tugged a quilt from the trunk, handed it to her. She unfolded it, traced one seam where Mary had embroidered a small flower, almost smiled. He banked the fire, dimmed the lantern. As he turned, he saw her open the violin case. The instrument inside looked older than both of them. Varnish crazed, one string snapped, bridge chipped. She lifted a rag-wrapped bundle from beneath it, unrolled rosin, spare pegs, a short file she used to smooth a splinter along the fingerboard. Work quick, practiced. She tucked the violin under her chin, drew bow across 3 surviving strings. A thin chord drifted, cracked, but true. She adjusted pegs. Tried again. Sound stretched farther this time, like a candle flame refusing draft. Morgan stopped halfway to his cot. She played no tune, just held note, bent it into quiet shapes, testing the room. The timber walls answered with a hum that filled spaces even fire couldn't reach. His ribs loosened. For a heartbeat he heard breathing other than his own, as if Mary's ghost exhaled. When she lowered the violin, rain had softened to a hush. She set bow and instrument carefully, lay on the rug, quilt pulled to her collarbone. He eased onto the cot, staring at rafters. The house felt larger than it had in 2 years, yet less empty. Somewhere after midnight embers snapped, Morgan woke to a hitch in his lungs, not pain but awareness. Clara sat by the hearth, feeding thin sticks to the coals. She glanced back, eyes reflecting emberlight, then nodded toward the roof. Quiet but alive. He slept again. At dawn, light seeped through smoke-stained glass. He found Clara outside, hair still damp from rain, kneeling by the overgrown garden. She pressed fingers into soil, lifted a clump, crumbled it, smelling for life. He approached. She pointed to the burned barn, then to the black ground, traced a circle with her finger, a question. He answered with a shrug. Nothing grows there since the fire. She stood, brushed dirt from hands, wiped moisture on her trousers. Without a word, she walked toward the barn ruins, stepping careful over charred beams. He followed, curiosity outweighing the tug of caution. Near the center, where ash lay thick as dust, she crouched, pressed both palms to the earth, closed her eyes. He felt foolish watching. Felt something else, too, heat rising from embers long cold. When she looked up, a faint smile creased her mouth. She withdrew a small paper envelope from her coat pocket, tapped out 3 seeds into her palm, round, ivory, unremarkable. She nudged his hand open, placed them on his scarred skin, folded his fingers closed. Her gaze said, "Plant these." She tapped her own chest once. Trust. Morgan stared at the seeds, felt their tiny hardness against callus, more real than the nails he'd driven yesterday. Thunder rumbled far away, less threat than echo. He cleared his throat. "Rain will be back," he said. She nodded, then motioned to the well. They spent the morning turning soil where nothing had grown. He fetched water. She kneaded clay shoulder deep, mixing ash with memories. When the seed sank beneath the dirt, he realized he had not thought of the fire for hours. Sweat stung his eyes, but he didn't wipe it. Clara stood, brushed mud from her reddened hands, looked at the sky as if bargaining for one more storm. He led her to the porch, poured coffee darker than night, set the cup between them. A breeze slid to the open door, carrying the scent of wet ash now tempered with loam. He inhaled, slow and full, noticed how lungs expanded without protest. She unrolled a strip of cloth, wrapped her burned knuckles, tied off a knot that looked like promise. The violin waited by the hearth. Somewhere inside the instrument, a note lingered, ready to swell the room again. Morgan sipped coffee, let the silence settle soft instead of heavy. The stranger under his roof had planted seeds in black ground. Whether they sprouted corn or only courage, he already felt the soil shifting, breaking apart where grief had compacted it for too long. The wind changed, cooler, hinting at evening rain. He nodded once, a small bow of thanks she would understand. She answered with the corner of her mouth and lifted the violin, letting the bow rest like a question above the strings, waiting for night to close and music to breathe the house alive. A slim moon rose, silvering the scorched beams of the barn and the violin's varnish alike. Clara sat on the porch rail, bow balanced across her knees, watching Morgan dig a second furrow beside the first. He worked by lantern glow, shovel biting soft black and earthed away a man tests a wound that may have healed. When he finished, he tamped the soil and straightened, breath visible in the cool night. She lifted the instrument, drew 3 tentative notes, quiet acknowledgments, and he nodded once, satisfied. Morning spread thin gold across the plains. Morgan woke to the smell of coffee already simmering. Clara knelt at the stove, coaxing flame with a sliver of cedar. She added pinches of chicory and ground corn husk. The bitter aroma filled cracks where wood smoke used to linger alone. He leaned in the doorway, wondering whether a stranger's hands could belong so seamlessly in a kitchen that had forgotten company. Breakfast was silence and cornbread. She pushed half her slice toward him. He tried to refuse. She fixed him with that unblinking gaze, insisted without words. He ate. When plates were rinsed, she opened her violin case, removed the broken string, and motioned for a length of horsehair. Morgan unearthed the bridle from the barn. She teased free one clean strand, twisted it, tied it deftly to the tailpiece. It held. Rain returned late afternoon, light but steady. Morgan found Clara kneeling in the ruined garden, palms cupped to catch droplets. She flicked water onto ash, dark speckles forming constellations in the dirt. He fetched 2 buckets, filled them at the gutter spout, poured a slow circle around the planted seeds. She pressed fingertips into the mud, sealed the ring. He caught himself expecting steam to rise from her hands. Inside, thunder nudged the cabin walls. Clara tightened pegs, drew bow. Music slid out low, throaty, a lament that knew fire but remembered rivers. Morgan sat at the table, stirring coffee long gone cold, not drinking, just listening. As notes filled the rafters, they uncovered memories he had locked behind smoke. Married before dawn humming over biscuit dough, the child unborn who never heard that song. The tune tapered. Clara lowered the violin, eyes on his. He realized tears blurred his vision. He wiped them, embarrassed. She reached across the table, set 2 fingers on his wrist, steady, grounding. The silence after music felt like breath after grief. Daybreak brought a sky rinsed clean. They rode to the upper pasture, Morgan on his mare, Clara afoot, violin strapped across her back. At the ridge a spring seeped from shale, forming a pool choked with weeds. She knelt, sliced roots, smelled them, shook her head. Not what she sought. Morgan watched her survey the land, like a cartographer mapping veins beneath skin. They followed a deer trail into a stand of cottonwoods, spared by fire. Clara pointed to a sapling bent under its own weight, leaves dull. She scraped bark, pale, thirsty. Morgan shouldered shovel, dug a trench from the spring to the roots. When water trickled, Clara pressed the bark flat, whispering something too soft to carry. Leaves brightened within minutes, or maybe he imagined it. Evenings shimmer with heat, rising off damp earth. Morgan chopped the last of last winter's wood, sweat carving canals through soot on his arms. Clara hauled split logs, stacked them near the door, arranging sizes like cords. Small for kindling, thick for night burn. Supper was pinto beans, onions, and a pinch of salt, rare treat from a forgotten bag. They ate on the porch, legs dangling, dusk painting the horizon rust. A coyote yipped. Clara lifted bow, replied with a drawn-out harmonic that floated down the valley. The coyote answered, bemused, then loped away. Morgan chuckled, a brittle sound at first, then easier. Later, lightning glimmered on the far ridge, no thunder. Clara unrolled a bundle of cloth containing seeds larger than the first ones, pale melon, maybe squash. She set them on his palm. He examined their marbled shells. Ground still raw, he murmured. She shook her head, traced a half circle in the air. Moon cycle, time enough. He pocketed the seeds. When sleep came, he dreamed of green vines climbing charred rafters, blossoms bursting like sparks in reverse. They woke to gunfire echo, distant east. Morgan stiffened, reached for the rifle he hadn't touched since burying Mary. Clara watched him load a single shell, breath steady. They hiked to the ridge. In the valley below, 2 riders herded a line of scrawny cattle, popping shots to scare strays. Not a threat, yet Morgan's pulse hammered. Smoke from the past curled in his mind. He gripped the rifle until knuckles blanched. Clara placed a hand on the barrel, lowered it. His shoulders dropped. Sun rode high when they returned. A neighbor's boy waited by the fence, hat in hands. His mother lay fevered, Dr. miles away. Morgan hesitated. The fire had taught him what happens when he leaves home. Clara was already fetching her pouch. She slipped past, shoulders brushing his, firm, reassuring. They followed the boy to a sod house where the woman coughed blood. Clara brewed willow bark, sage, a shaving of violin rosin. Steam filled the cramped room, clung to cracked beams. She spooned bitter draught past the woman's trembling lips, then set compress on her chest, humming low, the same river lament. The woman's breath slowed, grew less ragged. Morgan stood useless, yet witnessing. Back at the ranch, dust-colored clouds spilled violet across the sky. Clara sank onto the porch, exhaustion etched in the slump of her shoulders. Morgan brought warm water, washed dry blood from her fingers, bandaged the old scar anew. She watched his hands work, then rested her palm over his. A mirror of the morning's gesture, roles reversed. The evening meal was silence and shared bread. When stars ignited, Clara tuned the violin, lit the lamp, and played. Not lament this time, something lighter, edging toward joy but stopping shy of it, as though asking permission. Morgan closed his eyes, letting sound repaint fire-charred memories with softer colors. He found breath sliding in and out free of smoke. The next dawn, tiny green hooks pierced the ash where their first seeds lay. Clara touched one, smile spreading slow. Morgan exhaled, surprised at the warmth rising in his chest. He fetched the melon seeds from his pocket, knelt beside her. Together they pressed them into damp soil, covering each with a thumbprint seal. Clouds gathered overhead, promising rain, but he felt no fear of lightning. Clara rose, brushed dirt from her knees, lifted the violin under her chin. When she played, the notes sounded like drops before a storm, gentle, inevitable, life returning. Morgan listened, breathing steady, and realized the house wasn't just quiet anymore. It was listening too, waiting for the storm, unafraid. Dawn carried heat instead of breeze, a warning Morgan recognized from a night his house caught fire. He saddled the mare anyway, needing fence posts from the cedar stand 3 miles north. Clara insisted on coming, violin slung as always, a coil of fresh-cut willow bark in her pocket. They rode in silence broken only by cicadas. At the stand, Morgan felled 2 small trunks, sweat-stinging eyes. Clara stripped bark, coiled it for tincture, humming fragments of the river tune. Mid-song she froze, head tilted. Hoofbeats, 4, maybe 5, approached from the south trail. Morgan set axe aside, grabbed his rifle, felt pulse slam against scar. Through cotton brush emerged 2 men on bay horses. The first wore a velvet waistcoat gone shine-thin, collar stiff with sweat. The second, broad as an ox, lugged a shotgun across saddlebow. Clara inhaled sharp. Her bow hand twitched, the only sign of fear. Afternoon, Velvet called, tipping hat. Lost a fiddle I aimed to retrieve. Eyes slid to the violin case on Clara's back. Owes me coin. Morgan stepped beside her. She owes nothing here. Velvet smiled, slow. Debt travels. He nodded to the ox-built man, who levered his shotgun. Clara moved first, no panic, just fluid motion. Slipped the violin into Morgan's hands, then drew a small clasp knife he hadn't known she carried. She stood between the horses and Morgan, as if between embers and wind. Velvet laughed. Steel that size won't buy you freedom, girl. She said nothing, but her stare pinned him like a tack. The silence stretched, hot, sticky. Morgan felt sweat on the trigger guard. A gust rattled cedar leaves. 2 more riders appeared behind Velvet, younger, restless. Shotgun man spat. We take her. We take the fiddle. We go. Morgan raised the rifle, barrel steady at Velvet's chest. Not today. Velvet's gaze flicked to the trees, assessing cover. Before he could signal, Clara stepped forward, knife reversed, blade pressed her own burned palm. She spoke low, voice like sand sliding down glass. Touch violin, I cut tendon. Worthless to you. Velvet's smile faltered. Music earned him coin in saloons. A crippled player held none. He weighed threat against profit, eyes narrowing. Morgan cocked the rifle. Ride. Shotgun man shifted, but Velvet lifted a hand. Easy. To Morgan, you'll regret charity. He wheeled his horse. The others hesitated, then followed. Hoofbeats receded into heat. Clara's shoulders sagged only after dust settled. Morgan lowered rifle, swore under breath. She wiped blood, a shallow slice across her scarred palm, wrapped it with willow bark strip, nodding one-handed. He tried to help. She shook her head, eyes soft but resolute. They hauled cedar posts home, beneath a sky the color of hammer brass. At the ranch, Clara took violin to the porch, tightened a new string, played scales until the sun slid blood-red. Morgan set fresh posts, every strike of his hammer echoing gunmetal promises. Night brought stillness, then distant hoofbeats again, Velvet's gang circling, testing edges. Morgan kept lamp low, rifle across knees. Clara tuned the violin, bow hair glinting like spider silk in lamplight. "They'll come with fire," Morgan whispered. She nodded, drew from her pouch a fist of wild sage, tossed sprigs into the hearth. Sweet smoke curled, settling nerves. Before dawn a glow flared against the southern ridge, barn roof caught. Morgan cursed, sprinted with buckets, Clara at his heels. Flames licked dry boards, hungry. She thrust violin into Morgan's arms, grabbed shovel, heaved her at embers. He followed, beating sparks with wet blanket. Smoke clawed lungs, but memory no longer paralyzed him. Fear burned clean into action. Shotgun roared, a blast aimed wide to scare them from water trough. Clara dug behind a rain barrel, eyes burning. Morgan wheeled, fired once. A yelp, hoof thunder retreating. They fought the fire an hour, until only smoke moaned from the beams. Dawn light revealed ruin. Roof gone, hay turned to black lace. Clara pressed cool rag to Morgan's blistered forearm. He touched her bandaged hand, whispered, still worth nothing to him. She almost smiled. Townfolk arrived late morning, drawn by smoke column. Morgan refused pity, accepted only buckets. They cleared debris, stacked salvageable boards. Deputy Quinn rode up, heard the story, shook his head. Velvet Danes wanted over 3 counties. We'll wire the marshal. He eyed Clara, wary respect dawning. That evening Morgan found Clara at the garden. Green shoots stood taller, leaves unscorched despite sparks. She knelt, brushed ash from one tender stem. He joined her, set violin beside seedlings. "You stay," he said, not question, but pledge. She traced a circle around the sprout, then drew 2 smaller circles within growth rings. Her finger pressed the center. "Root," she whispered. He covered her hand with his calloused palm. For the first time since the fire, he felt the ground breathe warmth through his skin. Velvet might return. Storms would, too. But music, dirt, and 2 mended souls held a stronger claim. Overhead, clouds gathered for honest rain, not arson's flame. Morgan inhaled the scent, wet earth, sage, cedar sap, and realized he was breathing easy, as if lungs had widened overnight. Clara lifted the violin, bow hovering. Instead of lament, she played a frontier reel, notes skipping like creek water over stones. Morgan laughed, a raw sound that startled them both, then steadied into rhythm with her tune. Between cracked boards of the ruined barn, the first melon vines curled skyward, reaching for whatever light tomorrow chose to give. Days lengthened, heat broke, and the prairie began to breathe again. 2 weeks passed without hoofbeats. Velvet Dane's gang vanished eastward, rumor said, nursing a wound and a grudge. Morgan hammered new rafters where char once ruled. Clara steadied each board, her mended hand sure despite fresh scar. Nights they slept with doors unbarred. The violin's reel still echoed in Morgan's head as he woke at first light, lungs expanding as if they had never tasted smoke. Rain arrived in short, generous bursts, enough to swell the garden rose. The first squash flower opened sunrise yellow. Melon vines trailed beyond their ring. Morgan discovered Clara kneeling there at dawn, humming scales to the seedlings. He poured coffee, sat on the porch rail, let her voice weave into birdsong. One afternoon, Deputy Quinn rode up grinning broad. Marshal caught Velvet near Fort Cairn, shotgun man too. "Won't trouble you again." He tipped his hat to Clara, respect full in his gaze, and tossed Morgan a folded sheet. Claim papers for reimbursement of burned hay. Quinn winked. County owes heroes more than words. Dust clouds swallowed him, leaving silence scented with promise. Morgan read the figures, lips parting. Enough to roof the barn with fresh tin, maybe even by cows. He looked at Clara. She shook her head gently, tapped the garden, then his chest. "Grow first, live simple." He laughed, tucked the paper into the ledger he had started filling again, cropped tallies, not regrets. They hauled stone from the creek, to edge a new root cellar. Morgan lifted each slab. Clara packed clay between, fingers swift. Sweat streaked their faces, but when they paused or watered, the quiet felt companionable, not empty. He realized he had gone entire mornings without remembering the night Mary screamed. One twilight, Clara returned from the ridge with a pocket full of green pods, milkweed bugs clicking inside. She scattered them near corn to eat aphids. Morgan stared, then chuckled. "You fight with everything," he said. She dipped her head, the near smile he had learned to watch for, and mime bow and fiddle across rows. Music equals shield. The violin gained a new string from town, gift of the blacksmith who admired her playing. She rest-strung, tuned, and that evening played a waltz Mary once favored. Morgan closed his eyes, heard memory shift. Pain dulled, harmony carried on a stranger's hands. Autumn crept, cool nights turning leaves bronze. Corn ears fattened, squash spilled golden. At harvest they worked side by side, filling baskets until barns smelled of sun-warmed rind and new hay. Clara carved a sunflower pattern on one post, marking the first season not ended in ash. When the last row stood bare, Morgan rolled a barrel to the porch, sawed its top, and filled it with corn. He lifted a handful, let kernels cascade through his fingers. "Breath enough for 2 winters," he murmured. Clara pressed palm to his chest, then to his back, as though feeling lungs rise. That night frost silvered the grass. Morgan woke before dawn, found Clara gone from her cot. Panic flared, until he saw lamplight glowing in the barn. He slipped inside. She stood by the fresh tin roof, bow poised, playing soft for the sleeping mare, for the melons stacked like moons, for rafters still smelling of cedar. He listened, heart quiet. When she finished, he stepped forward, held out a small box, for the one who gave back breath. Inside lay a carved bone mute, smooth as river stone. She fitted it over the bridge, drew the bow. The violin's voice hushed to a murmur, music meant for 2 souls only. She played a lullaby, and when notes faded, she spoke, barely louder than strings. Home. Morning painted the garden frost white, yet green shoots pushed through, winter rye she had scattered unseen. Morgan realized roots had sunk deeper than he feared. They tended the plot, mulched with straw, and when the sun climbed, steam lifted like spirits leaving. That afternoon he hitched the wagon, drove to town with Clara. At the mercantile he bought nails, seed potatoes, a bolt of indigo cloth. She chose a spool of gut string, 1 tin of lilac soap. Townsfolk greeted them by name. No longer the broken rancher and voiceless stranger, but Mr. Hale and Miss Finch. She managed a shy thank you when the storekeep complimented her garden squash. On the ride home, wagon creaked under supplies and unspoken plans. Sunset poured blood orange light over the prairie. Clara set the violin under her chin, mute removed now, and played a tune bright as the sky. Morgan urged the mare slower to listen. The road, once haunted, seemed to hum beneath wheels. They reached the gate at full dark. Lamp in the window welcomed them. Morgan had left it for her, but tonight it looked like theirs. He helped her down, carried parcels inside. She set the violin on the mantel, tucked her scarred hand into his. No words, none needed. Outside, wind rustled dry corn stalks. Inside, the hearth crackled. Morgan drew his first relaxed breath in years, realizing it was not borrowed but earned. Clara squeezed his fingers once, a silent chord of agreement. If this quiet resurrection move you, subscribe, drop a like, and share in the comments which moment. The blanket shield, the barn second birth, or the midnight lullaby in tin roof shadows. Breathe deepest for you. Your voices keep the prairie alive with stories worth the long ride.